Yo, in the AI age, will the real humans please stand up? Stand up.
I want us to fast forward 5 years. Yeah. And, we all have been brought up in a world where we looked at stuff ourselves, used our brain personally to analyze and then figure out meaning from all the morass of information that was put in front of us. Now, the brain has been trained in a particular way to think, and that therefore it is actually a very well fine-tuned engine. But a bunch of people who are coming up today are not being trained to do that. They start actually believing that anything that this actually spits out is gospel truth. Now, it could be, I'm sure it will evolve over a period of time. It might get better and better, and it might be close to gospel truth, which is fine. But then all that I'm beginning to wonder is you cannot become uh, a marathon runner by watching a marathon runner run or by watching a video on how to win marathon. You have to do it yourself. You have to practice it yourself. Now, is that an art that is going to go away? If so, what is going to be the implication of that for people like us in year 2040? Not
Yeah.
like us, but the generation that is coming up. Where will they be in 2040? And I know where I'll be in 2040. I'll certainly not be doing this job. I'll be in a beach somewhere. But then I'm wondering about my children and my grandchildren.
For me, actually, and maybe this is sort of connected to what you're saying, Stan. But when I think about the journey that a young researcher used to go through when I started off and what they go through today, I find that there's less and less of training that they receive.
Sure.
Right? And you add to that everything that Stan was saying about how they engage with the world of AI and what they believe of the output of AI and so on. So there is definitely something going on there which is very disruptive. So we are at an inflection point. But equally, I think that where the training should probably happen is, and will probably happen, is experts or people with a lot of experience in a particular domain actually training the machine rather than training the newbies entering the research industry. So for instance, I find that we spend more and more time, we invest more and more dollars into training the models to get better and better at codifying what an expert does. Less and less time on training the young people entering the industry. Good or bad is
training. Who's doing the training?
So the training
is being done by a bunch of young people who themselves haven't gone through the training that you and I went through.
Well, speaking specifically of qual research, Stan, I'd say that the training is being done by, like at Kanta, for instance, I'm working with the data science team to train our models. And I suspect it's probably the same in other agencies as well, that you have, at least in qual research, because of how specialized it is, you have to basically find ways to train the machine to be able to pick up on empathy, on intuition, on things like that, which currently the models don't necessarily do. And what does that mean really for that engagement or that interaction between human and machine or human and model? That's going to be an interesting space to watch.
I think it came out in this discussion is that right now every asset has a market, right? Which creates differentiation between the asset classes or asset categories, right? So for example, oil is crude oil, refined oil, whatever, processed oil. Data, which is all that is feeding these AI engines, has no differential market right now. It's a homogenized commodity. 1 terabyte of poor data is treated same as 1 terabyte of very cleanly labeled, diversified, very clear processing possibilities data. So unless that changes, what you are saying, Tara, that good data will be required, and that then needs to be differentiated eventually Otherwise, the outcome is not going to be any better, right? It's going to be those generic, what we are getting right now.
Well, I was just going to raise the point about chain of custody in data. So the issue essentially right now with synthetic data, which is what I'm assuming you're referencing right now, Sumer, when you say human data versus, right? The issue with synthetic data is the fact that you don't always know where it's coming from, right? And speaking specifically of qualitative data, right? If you don't layer on that context when you're looking at, how people respond to a particular issue, what their attitudes are, or what their preferences are, that data is meaningless, right? Because qualitative data by very nature is so personal, right? So if you don't have that context and you don't have the sample sizes either of quantitative data, then that data actually is, without the right chain of custody, it's useless. So I just wanted to raise the point about the future. Governance is really important, what Stan was saying earlier, but also establishing clear chain of custody, and that's probably part of governance as well. Yeah, Preeti, go ahead. I'll come back to this later.
No, I think I kind of was also going to talk about the governance and the guardrails that are needed, because I kind of mentioned this yesterday, that in this sort of race to standardization, efficiency, cost effectiveness, we're kind of racing to the average. We're trying to focus on how do we get to quicker, faster, not necessarily better. And somewhere that's kind of raising those safety guardrails. And David, I'm sure you probably have experienced this, but when I was at Google, I mean, I was struggling to even take in the amount of, just respond to the amount of, vendors who were coming out to me and pitching new solutions. And there were some really exciting solutions, but sometimes the guardrails, the safety guardrails weren't in place, which didn't allow me to sort of even experiment with those new agencies. And today I'm working with a couple of startups, and what I find is that they're AI native, they're really good. And unlike Stan, where you bring in the 40 years of expertise, and what you mentioned, Kara, they're really great from an engineering perspective. But what's kind of the layer which needs to be added on is that research expertise behind those tools. And I think there is a lot of potential in many of these tools and developments that these sort of young entrepreneurs are bringing in, but they're again solving at the moment for the efficiency and the cost and saying, hey, I can scale and I can get it better without necessarily adding that level of expertise that you and Stan have just talked about. And I think that's kind of really important, as to how do you actually bring that expertise in a move towards AI, which I think it's unstoppable. It's going to happen. But how do you continue to add that expertise without which you get to that race to the average?
Both ends, right? As Stan and Tara said, both ends. When you're building a model, as well as when you are analyzing it, as David also said.
And I think that links a lot to the 5 years down the road, which is a scary thought of just even thinking 2 years down the road, what's going to happen, because things are changing so incredibly fast. But I think that is part of the where it's incumbent upon us to really think about looking around the corner as to where this could go, both good and bad, and preparing for those eventualities in a way where it's thinking about the responsible usage of the technology. You talk a lot about data governance. That is of paramount importance, having consistency of thought there and clarity of thought with very clear guidelines and guardrails for establishing those partnerships, establishing those use cases, those test cases. Is really important to be able to experiment in a world where there is a limitless number of potential experiments. But being able to set a guardrails around how to do that in a responsible fashion is of vital importance. So I think that's almost like step one. And then once you've delivered on a general sort of ethos behind that, then you can migrate over to the practical execution of it, and then think about what's going to happen next. Like if in 5 years time, I mean, I can't tell you how many vendors I met with that said, They could do create a discussion guide for me in 2 seconds, and it would be wonderful. And I would look at it and I'd be like, that's kind of a bummer. You know, that happens more often than not. So I think it's really important to be able to have that area of experimentation, to be able to look to see where we can push, and then be able to push forward, but like really responsibly.
The key point, David, over there is somebody actually believed that the discussion guide they produced was fantastic. And it was you who had to tell that person that, no.
That's right.
So, you know, the guardrails and governance that Preeti talked about, who was going to do it? Is my question. Therefore, you know, the human in the loop, a human with a bit of brain, a human with a bit of experience in the loop, is actually mission critical. And I'm finding that, you know, there is maniacal focus towards, you know, faster and cheaper, but not better. Yeah, that is the direction in which everybody is going. And my worry is that you could end up creating garbage at scale, and most people who create it passionately believe that they have actually created value at scale. Otherwise, they wouldn't, you know, who would create garbage at scale if they knew that they were creating garbage, right? So they all create garbage at scale because they passionately believe that they are adding value. The question is, how do we do it? How do we have governance in place to prevent garbage at scale? Trust me, every single output that ChatGPT produces, you read it, it makes immense sense. It makes beautiful reading. It makes beautiful reading, but does it actually reflect reality? I don't know.
The amazing thing was that once I was researching something and I said, give me references. It actually gave me references.
Which is all primarily Wikipedia and Reddit.
Yeah, but when I independently check those references, there's nothing that exists, right? No study by Accenture exists or McKinsey that says that. So it was fascinating that they can even quote references without you know, it being true, which is just
And honestly, you know, if you look at the data sources, it is largely Wikipedia and Reddit. And there, you know, anybody with a cell phone can post what they want.
Yeah.
And that's why, you know, I keep using the phrase garbage at scale. Faster and cheaper.
One of the things
You go, Preeti.
all right, I'll just complete this. I think one of the things that I personally really believe in, and I try to do it, that I feel that we have to really, I can't say God, but in some ways really focus on ensuring that this whole idea of the human in the loop, the context that humans bring in, isn't missing. And honestly, whenever I'm on a panel, whenever I'm speaking at events, I really try and push this, because I find that there are so many pitches which is all about, right, your brief is going to be generated in real time, which is going to be translated into a discussion guide or a questionnaire, and your report's going to be generated, and et cetera, et cetera. And then if you have a synthetic sample, you'll have the results in less than 2 hours or 1 hour, you know, or even less, you know, 10 minutes. I really personally feel responsible. And, you know, we said, this is what I've done, you know, 25 plus years, this is what I've done. And I almost feel personally responsible. And so just want to say that, you know, I do think in some ways, many of us will have to continue to push this idea that we need to focus on the better as well, and not just the faster and cheaper.
I can't help but continue to think, Stan, about the thing that you mentioned before, which is all of us here can do that because we've been in the weeds. We've done a lot of the work. We've been involved in so much of the very manual processes in some cases of building all these different studies. For that future generation that's coming up, how do they get trained to see the forest through the trees and be able to like identify where those insights, those key insights are, if they hadn't had to troubleshoot for that in the past? So that is definitely something that keeps me up a little bit at night as I have young children who are going to the workforce. But how do you sort of really train the next generation and think about this? This is not a unique problem to our generation, by the way. Generations before us have experienced similar types of innovations, and they've all figured it out. So I have no doubt that we'll figure it out. But it is that we should always keep in the back of our minds.
I think we will figure it out. I'm very bullish that we will figure it out. But I would like to just put on the table that I think human in the loop, the kind of stuff that people like Tara do, is actually mission critical. Because if you don't understand what is actually making someone do what they do, analyzing that data is never going to tell you. I mean, the example that you gave yesterday, Tara, about how somebody uses mosquito coils for their cows, yeah, instead of using it inside their house. I thought about it and thought about it and thought about it and said, "Oh my God, what AI could have ever told you that?" No one. It will tell you that it was bought by this poor income person, and they buy 4 boxes of it every day, and da 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 da. It will give you a lot of analysis of what they have done. But the fact that they use it for driving mosquitoes away from their cows in the cowshed, that is the real value of humans. That is the real value of humans. How do we bring those values of humans to the table? And if you don't bring humans into the conversation, I don't think we deserve to exist as humans. Full stop.
But I told Tara when I met.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go on, Sumit. But yeah, just sort of attribution. That was Preeti actually, Stan.
I would just said when we met in London, Tara and I were having a, I went to sell something, but then we ended up just talking about, research in general and the future of research and the human in research. And I think my view was that the future research is basically going to be qualitative in my mind. It's all observational, it's all ethnographic, anthropological. I think that's where it probably will survive, because that would be the real source of truth about human interactions and about human experience than anything else in terms of feeding new data.
Yeah.
But
and I was sorry, go on, Sumit, finish.
No, go ahead. I have something which probably is a little bit more summarizing of the conversation, but that's for later.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that human in the loop point, and thinking that there are 3 spaces where we really need human intervention and inspiration. And the first really is in the input space, and that's going back to the point you were making, Sumer, about data differentiation and the fact that first-party data. So, I mean, being at Kantar, actually, a lot of the work that we do is with first-party data, right? And I think we need to spend a lot more time in really labeling and cleaning out that first-party data for this world, right? Because I was doing some work a few weeks ago, which you would call qual at scale, right? Which is essentially qualitative work across a large quantitative sample size. And I started looking at the data like a qualitative researcher, right? I couldn't just wait for the tables to come in. I had to sort of get in and look at what were the verbatims were like, what each person in that sample of 130 said. And it shocked me to see that, there were lots of instances where you can tell that this is not a bona fide human being who's responding, right? And that obviously, and now that means that you have to put in those guardrails in place. You have to find a way to use models to weed out that sort of spurious data. Not to say that this is not something Stan will vouch for this. This has been a problem that we've faced in the offline world as well, in the non-AI world as well for years. But AI really scales the problem. So it becomes really scary if you can't really take care of it. So at the input stage, I think we really need strong guardrails, human intervention. And then I think to, David, your point about the discussion guides, right? And the fact that if you don't have a good discussion guide, anything that you get from there, right? And I don't even mean questions that are, poor questions. I just mean questions that come from a place of bias, sometimes, which we are not even conscious of. That can be really harmful, because what we get back is going to seem like the truth, but it is a truth which has been generated by a starting point, which has a certain bias built in. So really being careful about what that discussion guide looks like is going to be really critical. And then there is the process of grounding, which is all of the stuff about, how do you contextualize this? How do you make sure it's, based in lived human experiences? And yesterday, Stan was giving some great examples of how you learn so much about a person just by being in that person's environment, right? The ethnography, Sumer, that you're talking about, and lots of really interesting examples that Stan gave yesterday. But that's all about grounding, right? So how can we sort of formalize and scale that process of grounding with all the AI that's available to us? And finally, the output, right? Which is, I guess, going back to the point about being an editor and not an author, right? So that whole storytelling space, and how are you able to frame something so that it's really powerful and it is a real insight and so on. So those are the three spaces, I think, where we need either human intervention or human inspiration.
Great. Well said. Well said.
Exactly what I was going to summarize, but I'm going to add one more thing just at the beginning. Sorry, Preeti, she says I'm just going to add one because that's what I was wanted to summarize it. But one step before the input is that we need more challenging the LEMs and foundation models to show the source of where they are getting the data that they're feeding to us for our purposes. So there needs to be more pushback on understanding what sources and claim and be able to reject certain sources that we believe are not authentic or correct. How much real human data that they have really utilized. I think there needs to be a mechanism to do that too. So that's all I'm going to add. Sorry, Preeti, I keep speaking over you.
Yeah, I was please summarize, Thora.
Can I ask a question? It doesn't sound like humans are really in the loop. I think from what we're saying, it sounds like humans are really leading.
Yep.
So I think it's just as an ending point for me, like feels very much like we are the drivers of this bus, and so I think we just need to make sure that it doesn't feel like we're receivers, but we're the ones that are actually acting and making these decisions and actively making those decisions.
It needs to be human-centric with humans in the center. That's the. Otherwise, we'll be breathing our own exhaust.
This one-liner. How do you come up with these so many so easily and so quickly? Stan, that's an art.
Quotes.
And see, AI cannot do that. Also, that's come from experience.
AI is talking, but who's thinking?